Christine, welcome to the show. I'm so
Thanks
thrilled
for
to have you
having
today.
me. I'm excited to get to talk with you today.
I am too. I told you before we hit record, I always get really excited when I hear about another book written for pastors' wives. And I'm so thrilled that you've written Thriving as a Pastor's Wife, Practical Tools to Embrace Your Influence and Navigate Your Unique Role. And when I hear about a book like this, I always wonder, like, where did this come from in Christine? Like, have you been thinking about this book for a long time? Is it a book because I know, like, for me, I have several brewing in me that won't see the light of day for probably the next 10 years, but I think about them often. And I wonder, was the Pastor's Wife book something you thought, all right, when I cross that 20-year mark and I have some years under my belt, maybe I'll write this thing. Like, tell me the story behind the
I think this has been in me for a long time, but I knew I needed a little more experience and a little more seasons of ministry. But I just love encouraging pastors' wives. And so it's always been something I've wanted to write. And I actually have written a lot online and I have a podcast, and I often end up with pastors' wives as guests. And so that's just a topic I could talk about anytime. And I love speaking to pastors' wives and that kind of thing. So my first book was for church planting wives. And as soon as it came out, a lot of pastors' wives were like, well, this is helpful for us too. But I knew I needed some more time. So it's been brewing for a long time. And I think the heart behind it is, and why I love encouraging pastors' wives so much, is because when we started, I was really young. I married my husband, and a year later, we were in vocational ministry. I was in my early 20s, mid 20s. And I just felt so overwhelmed. You don't really know from the outside looking in, you don't really know all the things that we have to navigate. And so as soon as I'm in that role, I was like, I need some help. And I tell this story in the beginning of the book. There was a woman that lived down the street from me whose husband was also on staff with my husband. And she was older. She had teenagers. She had all this experience. And so I just thought, she's going to come down the street. She's going to knock on my door, sit on the couch with me, and she's going to help me figure this out. And she never really did that. She did come and check on me once, but I was afraid to ask questions. I just thought I must be the only one who doesn't know what's going on here. And so I just kind of think of myself in writing this book as that seasoned pastor's wife coming down the street, sitting on the couch with the reader and saying, hey, I know what you're experiencing, and some of it is really good and rewarding, and some of it's really challenging. And here's some things that I've learned along the way that might be helpful to you.
Yeah, that's so good. And I'm almost wondering, for my people who are listening who love their pastor's wife well, and they're listening because they want to know how to do that better. I'm wondering, because obviously this book is written for pastors' wives, but we're going to have people listening who are members of the capital C church, right? And they just want to know, what do I not know about being a pastor's wife? What types of questions in the beginning, when you wish she would have came and sat with you, what were some of those questions that you think, okay, all pastors' wives, when they step into this, these are some of the questions they start asking themselves?
Well, the list is long. First of all, am I going to make it? What do I do? How do I know what my gifts are? How do I manage expectations that I'm feeling from people? How do I develop friendships now where people are suddenly acting weird around me? How do I support my husband? How do I encourage him when he's discouraged? There are so many things that you're suddenly in and you don't know quite what to do. And I think those questions change over time. I don't think, even here I am decades later, I'm still asking questions because seasons of ministry change, or you might end up doing a different kind of ministry. We started church planting. I had the same experience where I thought, how do I do this? How do I manage being a mom of young kids and helping this thing get off the ground? Are we going to be okay financially? That kind of thing. So there's just tons of questions, and I try to answer them in this book. But I think for people who are listening who aren't pastors' wives, how encouraging would it be for me as pastor's wife if someone in my church came to me and said, hey, I don't quite understand what it's like to be you, but I picked up this book and I read it so that I could try to understand what you're facing. That would be so encouraging to me.
Yeah, same. I totally agree. And I know I've asked myself almost all of those questions that you rattled off. And so you can know with confidence that your pastor's wife has probably done the same. And I love that you used the word thriving or thrive in the title of the book. Why was that important? why was it important that you walk alongside pastors' wives so that they can thrive? What does that look like?
Well, I think I use that word because too often, I can speak for myself, I've just been surviving in ministry. I feel like I'm almost like holding on for dear life, and there's a out of control roller coaster, and I'm going up and I'm going down, and I can't quite hold on tight. And so I think I've spent, sometimes there have been years at a time that I have felt that I was just surviving and just making it. And there have been things along the way that God has taught me through trial and error, through other people, through the truth of his word, that has helped me to actually thrive where I am, not just survive. And so I wanted to share some of those things. The book is meant to be very practical. I tried to keep a lot of different contexts in mind. I know that every pastor's wife is different. Every context is different, but there are some practical things that we can talk about that might help us to thrive and not just survive. So things like boundaries, or how do I know when to say yes to something or to say no? And how do I say no? And how do I navigate criticism? And how do I deal with bitterness and resentment that has come up in my heart? Those kinds of things. I really wanted to share those with pastors' wives, because I think that pastors' wives are some of the most pivotal people in a church, in their church, that we all approach the role really differently, but we all are people of influence, and our presence matters in our churches. And so I really want to encourage those women to embrace where they are, to know themselves according to who God has made them, and to really be present and engaged with the people that God has given her to love.
Yeah, that's so good. Speaking of that, you talk in the book about how it's not God's desire that we stay in isolation. And I know that's something that so many pastors' wives experience. I know I've experienced that myself. When I married my husband, most of our listeners will know this, I moved away from everything I've ever known, 9 hours away from everything I've ever known, into a town of 12,000 people from a pretty decent sized town in Knoxville, Tennessee. So it was total and complete culture shock. The only people that I knew, and largely the only people I know now, are people in my church. So I was pastor's wife to everybody that I saw life on life with, right? And so I know I experienced some of that isolation in the beginning, and I just wonder, how do you hope to encourage pastors' wives in that, to seek community and friendship? And kind of like we talked about before we hit record, what's that balance, right? When you are their pastor's wife, but you do want to seek community, especially for pastors' wives who live maybe in a smaller area and kind of face some of those similar challenges as maybe I have.
This has been one of the biggest struggles I've had as a pastor's wife, is learning how to make friends within the church. Is that even possible? Because sometimes we are told you shouldn't be friends with people in your church. And then we're also told that we should make friends in our church and be vulnerable with people. And so we can get a lot of mixed messages about it. But I think also people do sometimes relate to us in ways that make friendship difficult. So we can't do anything about that, but we can do something about how we navigate it. And so I think this is a topic, and I do address it in the book, but this is a topic that can sometimes be hard for us to talk about, because we at some point have been hurt in building community and friendship in the church. And so I can kind of speak to my own experience of how it's been painful, and then maybe some things that I've learned along the way.
Yes.
So the first thing is that we, again, started when I was very young, and my husband was on staff at a large church, and I show up and I'm like eager to make friends. And I felt as if I had been wrapped in like a bubble or something, like people were different around me than I had ever experienced before. Like they would stop talking when I came near, or I felt in a sense like I was responsible for every conversation, that they were waiting for me to initiate. During this time, I also became a mom. One of my kids had special needs. And so I was just trying to figure out life like everyone else. And I wanted community and friends like everything else. And so like everyone else. And I remember thinking I had forgotten how to make friends. Like something just felt off to me. And I felt lonely. I probably felt lonely for the first decade of our ministry life. And I thought something was wrong with me. And I would show up at church and I was surrounded by all these people. And but I felt so insecure and intimidated by other women. And I was very in my head, thinking, what does she think about me? Why did I say that? What does she think about my husband? That kind of thing. And I began to get kind of frustrated with other women around me. Like, why don't they include me? Why don't they invite me? Why don't they respond to me the way that I wish that they would? And so I was just real angsty around friendship. I do think one thing that's helped me is later in my 30s, one of my friends said to me, Christine, this is a very common thing for most women. Pretty much every woman has these struggles. And I think that was helpful for me because I've only always been a pastor's wife. And I didn't understand that, hey, some of this is not because I'm a pastor's wife. Some of this is just the complexities of being an adult. But there are complexities that get layered on top of it for pastor's wives, like a friend disagreeing with my husband's decision or a friend leaving the church. That feels very personal. And so my response in those years was just to go inward. And I was just kind of waiting for other people to come toward me and to be who I wanted them to be. And what changed for me is I picked up a book called Life Together by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and he just read my mail. The first section is all about community, and he talks about that we have this wish dream of what we think community should be. And it's a very idealistic vision of friendship, of community, and we try to make it happen for ourselves. And when it doesn't happen, then we get real frustrated with ourselves, with other people, and with God. And that is exactly what I had done. And so I realized that I had kind of taken on an immature understanding of friendship. And so around that time, we moved from Texas to Virginia to plant a church. And I specifically remember my husband sitting with the core team going, okay, let's imagine what this church could be. And in my head, I'm thinking, I want community. I want to relate to people differently than I have at the church that we were at. But I realized that I was going to have to do some things differently. It wasn't just about what other people were doing. Yeah. So here's some things I've learned along the way that have helped me, because my relationship with community and friendship is totally different now. And some things that I chose to do differently have really helped that. And the first one is embracing that I am going to have to initiate and go toward other people. So sometimes I talk to other pastors' wives, and I totally get this, that we get frustrated that we're the ones that have to initiate almost every time. At some point, I just said to myself, you know what? That's just the way it is. And I'm just going to embrace that. That, there may be people that initiate, but there may not be. If I want to have friends, then I have to go to other people. And that's really what Jesus did. He was a person who he didn't come to be served, but to serve. And I think taking on that mindset helps us to kind of push through when we feel like it's me again doing the, making the phone call or texting or whatever. But that's what Jesus did. He didn't text, but he initiated with other people. So that was the first thing, just embracing, I'm going to initiate. The second one is rejecting expectations that, I think I had this huge list of qualities I was looking for and who I would consider a friend. And when I really thought about it, I thought, well, this is the person who has to be just like me. They have to be a pastor's wife. They have to have kids. They have to be similar personality to me and all that. And so I was putting these expectations on women, and of course no one could kind of meet those expectations. Yeah. So rejecting that and just kind of being open to, hey, one of my good friends is 10 years younger than me and single. And, another good friend is decades older than me and is like a second grandmother to my children. And so when I let go of those expectations, I suddenly see that God has placed people around me in my church that can be a friend. And are they going to be the perfect friend? No. Are they going to meet every need? No. That's what only Jesus can be. But I think when we release some of those expectations, we see there are actual people around us that God is trying to give us as friends. And then another one is rejecting assumptions. And so this is what really was getting me when I was younger pastor's wife, is I would go into a room of women at church and I would just think, oh, they must think this about me. They're making this assumption about me. And even sometimes letting the pastor's wife title be that assumption, thinking, oh, well, they don't want to talk to me because I'm one of the pastor's wives or whatever it was, And I think sometimes we can let that hinder us instead of going toward other people and just trying to get to know them and to let them get to know us. I think sometimes pastors' wives are the worst about letting people know us. We can hide really easily. And so we don't let people know us as people. And so that's the last one I would say, something I've learned, and this has been the hardest one for me to do, is to choose to be vulnerable with trustworthy people. And this, I would say, looking back as a young pastor's wife, the thing I was most focused on was impressing people rather than connecting to people. And so it was about image. It was about doing the role right. It was about performing, that kind of thing. But connecting is about relationship, and it requires vulnerability. And so I think we have to embrace that there's risk, especially for the pastor's wife. There is risk in pursuing friendship and in choosing to be vulnerable with people. And of course, we're not going to be vulnerable with every single person we meet. But as we develop relationships and we realize that people are trustworthy, who those people are, then we can take the risk of saying, here I am as a person. This is who I am, not just a pastor's wife, but here I am as a person. And so God has provided for me by me choosing to do those things. Now, have I been hurt in community? Yes, I have. I've been deeply hurt. But I think that the risk still is worth it because I've also developed deep relationships, even with people in my church.
Hey friends, quick break in this conversation to remind you of something. If you are loving the show, you're loving the conversations we're having, it would mean the absolute world to me if you would leave a rating and a written review on Apple Podcasts for Radical Radiance. When that happens, when more of those happen, the show gets put in front of more women, and in turn, it allows them the opportunity to take part in conversations that will show them more about what it looks like to radiate the heart of Jesus. Can't think of anything better than that. So it would mean the world to me if you would take just 2 minutes of your time and leave a rating and a written review. I'd love to hear what you think. Now, let's get back to the conversation. Yeah, that's so good. The one that really jumped out to me in this season is the releasing of expectations. I have seen that be so helpful for me. And I'll tell you why. I mean, in our town, and this is what I always say, women are primarily moms, nurses, and school teachers, by and large. And those are three very high and holy callings. And none of them are me yet. I'm not a mom yet, and I'm not a school teacher, and I'm not a nurse. And so by default, all of my friends are moms, I would say at this point. And so there's some life experience that we don't share there. And even age. So I have sort of two extremes. One of my sweetest friendships that I have here is with a college student in our church. And she's so mature. She's so precious. I adore her, and we have the best time. We're in totally different life stages. And on the other side of the spectrum, I have a couple really close friends who are in their 40s and have teenagers. And I don't identify with most of their life, right? But that doesn't mean that God can't bless that friendship in a different way. I think that took me a while to accept. At the beginning, I was just frustrated by it. And I almost felt like, God, why would you take me from a place where I had so much community and it was so deep rooted? And now I'm in a place where it feels like nobody is like me. Right. And I just have seen God really, really bless that when I have let go of the expectations that I've had for friendship. That's a really good way of saying what I feel like I've had to do in this season. So that's so
I love
helpful.
that you're kind of speaking. I would assume this college student may have begun in a discipleship type relationship or a mentor type relationship. And I think that that's something we can look for. If we're not sure who's a friend, we can at least begin with, hey, a younger woman, do you want to get together and study the Bible? A lot of times discipleship turns into friendship. In fact, the woman I was speaking of who's single and 10 years younger than me, that's where it began. It doesn't always turn into friendship. Investing ourselves in other people, that is going to build community and potentially friendship.
Yeah. I think that's so good. Okay. And on this topic a little bit, you talk some in the book about feeling misunderstood as a pastor's wife. And we've touched on this a little bit, but I know I have felt that in my 2.5 years of being a pastor's wife. And I'm sure it won't be the last time I will feel that. I would love to hear, again, let's encourage the church for a minute. How do we encourage the church to get to know their pastor's wife? And then on the opposite side, how do we maybe take those feelings of being misunderstood, but still seek community. I don't know. I'm not framing the question well, but I think you get what I mean.
Get it. Speaking to the church, I would say what I would want you to know about your pastor's wife. I don't know her, but I know pastors' wives, and I would want you to know that she genuinely loves Jesus and your church and you. So her heart is in this. She's trying to be fully engaged where she's at. I think also I want you to know your pastor's wife sacrificially serves in many ways that you don't know, and you're not going to know. Mm-hmm. And that's okay.
Like what? Like what? Name some of those things.
Well, for me, a lot of it is conversations with my husband. You know, just last week, he had to do a wedding that ended up being a really difficult circumstance. And he said, hey, can you sit down with me? And I've got to change up the sermon that I'm going to give at the wedding. And so we sat down and I helped him think that through. You know, he's not going to say at the wedding, my wife helped me with this. But also, you know, for moms with young kids, pastors' wives with young kids, and still I do this to this day. I'm getting to church on my own with my kids. And some of them have really young kids and nursing babies and toddlers, and they're getting everybody out the door on their own, praying for people who are hurting. They know a lot of what's going on, and so they're praying for you. And, you know, there's so many ways. I could go on and on and on, but just know that she is serving. She may not serve in the way you necessarily would expect, but she is serving. She is serving the Lord. Mm-hmm. And I think another thing I'd want you to know is that your pastor's wife experiences life just like you. She is fighting to trust the Lord in certain areas. She's fighting sin. She gets discouraged. She has deep wounds. Yep. She worries about her kids, and she has passions and interests apart from her husband and ministry. And so I think a lot of what I'm saying is a lot of her life and who she is kind of hidden away. It's tucked away. Her service, her struggles, her passions, her personhood is often tucked away. It could be behind her husband. It could be behind her children, behind her title. And so I would want you to consider her as a person. How can you get to know her as a person? I think an easy question you could ask, and maybe it's hard to say this because some pastors' wives might not necessarily respond. You know, I know what I would like. A simple question that you can ask your pastor's wife is, what are your interests? What do you like? What could you talk about for hours? Because that doesn't have anything to do with her title. It doesn't have to do with her husband. It doesn't have to do with her kids, but it gives you a peek into who she is as a person. So for me, I love books. I could talk about books for hours. And so if somebody shows interest in that, or they like books, we can talk about that, and it gives them a peek into who I am as a person. So that's something that you can do if you want to love your pastor's wife, is just notice her. And I don't mean like obsess or stalk her, but you know, notice how God's using her and let her know that. Tell her that, because she doesn't know. You could be the one to tell her. Or if you see something that you appreciate, tell her what you're thankful for, because she doesn't know that unless you tell her. And so you can be a pastor to her. You can be a minister to her by telling her those things. Yeah. And so you also asked about the pastor's wife who feels misunderstood. And I do think that's a common thing. I love Andy Crouch's book, Strong and Weak, where he talks about that this is something that comes with leadership, that we have these hidden vulnerabilities. There are things about being in this role that people don't know because they can't know. And I think that's super helpful for me to remember. It's not that people don't care. It's that they can't actually know, because these are things that are hidden and they're meant to be hidden. One thing that's really encouraged me in that is to know that God is a God who sees. I love the story of Hagar where she is distraught and she's in a really hard space and she has no one. And she goes out into the wilderness and God meets her there, and she's the first person to call God the God who sees. And she says he's the God who hears and the God who sees. That has helped me tremendously to know that God is a God who sees. So all of those things that are unseen by other people, and rightly so sometimes, that he sees that. And I love Hebrews 6:10 that says that he is not unjust to forget what you have done. I'm paraphrasing, what you have done for God's people. He sees all of that and he keeps record of it. and rewards that.
That's so, so good. So, so good. And I want to jump back to the whole love books. So somebody noticing and asking you that question, what are you interested in? And that opening the door for you to feel seen and known. That for me has unlocked the door of friendship more than once as a pastor's wife. And specifically, I love books too. And so in the beginning, there was, with a couple of my friends, there was this discovery period of like, man, we both love to read. We both have bookshelves on bookshelves of books that are half read and well loved and everything in between. And so a lot of our friendship is talking about that. We have very little else in common if we just look at, qualities on paper, but we both love to read. And so I think sometimes, whether you're the church member or you're the pastor's wife, seeing those common interests, at least for me, that has unlocked more than one door of friendships.
That's
I'm grateful
great.
for that.
Love it.
Yeah. Okay. So you've shared so many good things that I know you would probably answer this question with, but I'm curious if you could go back to young pastor's wife, Christine, and sit down and have coffee with her. What would you want to tell yourself now that you couldn't have known 20 years ago?
There are so many things I wish I could tell myself. The primary one being, you don't have anything to prove. You are not what you do. This is not about working for God or performing for God or people. This is about knowing Jesus and loving him and loving other people. I was just so intent on proving myself, and I didn't quite understand grace when we first started. And so that's where that comes from. It's just, I would go back and say, it's going to be okay. Relax. God loves you. And he will utilize you how he chooses to. And it may not be what you think it will be, but he loves you and he's got you.
Yeah.
And so that's been a huge theme for me. I have to go back to that a lot. I'm not what I do. I'm a loved child of God, and nothing I can do can change that, or nothing I cannot do will change that. I think another thing is just that ministry is a marathon. It is not a sprint. And that kind of goes along with the working. Like I wish that I had paced myself a little bit in the beginning and learned to take times of rest. It took us a long time as a couple to choose to take a Sabbath day and to actually stop and rest. And so I would say to myself, pace yourself. It's a marathon. I also would say, I think I struggled at the beginning to know, what do I give myself to? I don't know who I am. I don't know what God has made me to do. But one thing I know for sure for everyone, and this is something we did start early on, is just focusing on making disciples. That is God's plan. He blesses his plan. It is clear in scripture. And so whatever you do, the push behind that is making disciples. If it's teaching Bible study, you're making disciples. If it's meeting with a college student, you're making a disciple. If it's your children, you have young children at home, you're making disciples. That's the ministry that you want to give yourself to. And I think finally, I would just say there are seasons to ministry. And especially for the pastor's wife, I think that, if you have children, your ministry will change. You may have dormant seasons where you just feel very dry and that God is not near, that he is not using you. And, I can look back now and see that there are seasons that sometimes God had me doing one thing and then he changed that. And I always kind of grieved that transition.
Sure.
And sometimes it was really hard to kind of find my footing again. But eventually I found my footing. And then I had a new season. And then he changed that. And so I think just in all of it, we can trust Jesus that he is going to give us our next steps, that he has us where he wants us. If it's a dormant season, that's where he wants us. And there's an invitation in that for us. If we're at home with small children or our children have left the house, he has us where he wants us. So those are some of the lessons that I still go back to decades in that have kind of sustained me.
Yeah, that's so good. So encouraging. Okay, there is a question that I ask all of my guests that come on the show. And Christine, I'm so excited to ask you. And God has really used Psalm 34:5 in kind of the life of the podcast. It says, those who look to him are radiant and their faces are never covered in shame. And the question I love asking is, what about Jesus makes you radiant?
Well, there's so many things I could say. I mean, I think about his grace that I've learned, as I was just talking about. I think lately, what about him makes me radiant is that he is safe, that he is a refuge. Ooh. Just this morning, I was feeling I was feeling sad, and I was feeling a little bit lost. And I just sat with him and I told him that I feel sad and here's why. And I feel lost and here's why. And a lot of times when I'm telling him how I feel, I try to also ask, what does this tell me about who Jesus is and who I am? Reflected back in, a look in his face, and who does this say who I am? And today it was him just saying, you're safe with me. I'm a refuge. I love in Psalm often it talks about God as our refuge. He's my refuge. I can tell him when I'm sad. I can tell him when I feel lost. And I didn't come away with any answers, but I came away with just remembering he is my refuge. I can run to him with everything. And I can trust him that I don't know what's going on, but he knows. And I can trust in him. He's faithful.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. So good. Well, I would love for you to share, Christine, where can people connect with you? They can go grab the book anywhere, but how can they get in touch with you and the work that you do after this conversation?
The best place is my website, christinehoover.net. Or I'm often on Instagram at Christine Hoover.
Awesome. Well, I'm so grateful for you. I can't tell you how excited I am to see this book come out into the world and encourage so many pastors' wives. And I'm just grateful for the work that you're doing. So thank you for being my guest today.
Thanks so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation so much with